Chapter 11 of Little Lord Fauntleroy. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Susan Umpleby. Little Lord Fauntleroy by Frances Hodgson Burnett. Chapter 11. When Mr. Hobbs's young friend left him to go to Dorincourt Castle and become Lord Fauntleroy, and the groceryman had time to realize that the Atlantic Ocean lay between himself and the small companion who had spent so many agreeable hours in his society, he really began to feel very lonely indeed. The fact was, Mr. Hobbs was not a clever man, nor even a bright one. He was indeed rather a slow and heavy person, and he had never made many acquaintances. He was not mentally energetic enough to know how to amuse himself. And in truth he never did anything of an entertaining nature but read the newspapers and add up his accounts. It was not very easy for him to add up his accounts, and sometimes it took him a long time to bring them out right. And in the old days, little Lord Fauntleroy, who had learned how to add up quite nicely with his fingers and a slate and pencil, had sometimes even gone to the length of trying to help him. And then, too, he had been so good a listener, and had taken such an interest in what the newspaper said, and he and Mr. Hobbs had held such long conversations about the Revolution and the British and the elections and the Republican party, that it was no wonder his going left a blank in the grocery store. At first it seemed to Mr. Hobbs that Cedric was not really far away, and would come back again, that some day he would look up from his paper and see the little lad standing in the doorway, in his white suit and red stockings, and with his straw hat on the back of his head, and would hear him say in his cheerful little voice, "Hello, Mr. Hobbs! This is a hot day, isn't it?" But as the days passed on and this did not happen, Mr. Hobbs felt very dull and uneasy. He did not even enjoy his newspaper as much as he used to. He would put the paper down on his knee after reading it, and sit and stare at the high stool for a long time. There were some marks on the long legs which made him feel quite dejected and melancholy. They were marks made by the heels of the next Earl of Dorincourt, when he kicked and talked at the same time. It seems that even youthful earls kick the legs of things they sit on. Noble blood and lofty lineage do not prevent it. After looking at those marks, Mr. Hobbs would take out his gold watch and open it and stare at the inscription. From his oldest friend, Lord Fauntleroy, to Mr. Hobbs. When this you see, remember me. And after staring at it a while, he would shut it up with a loud snap, and sigh, and get up and go and stand in the doorway, between the box of potatoes and the barrel of apples, and look up the street. At night, when the store was closed, he would light his pipe and walk slowly along the pavement until he reached the house where Cedric had lived, on which there was a sign that read, "This house to let." And he would stop near it and look up and shake his head, and puff at his pipe very hard, and after a while walk mournfully back again. This went on for 2 or 3 weeks before any new idea came to him. Being slow and ponderous, it always took him a long time to reach a new idea. As a rule, he did not like new ideas, but preferred old ones. After 2 or 3 weeks, however, during which, instead of getting better, matters really grew worse, a novel plan slowly and deliberately dawned upon him. He would go to see Dick. He smoked a great many pipes before he arrived at the conclusion, but finally he did arrive at it. He would go to see Dick. He knew all about Dick. Cedric had told him, and his idea was that perhaps Dick might be some comfort to him in the way of talking things over. So one day, when Dick was very hard at work blacking a customer's boots, a short, stout man with a heavy face and a bald head stopped on the pavement and stared for 2 or 3 minutes at the bootblack's sign, which read, "Professor Dick Tipton can't be beat." He stared at it so long that Dick began to take a lively interest in him, and when he had put the finishing touch to his customer's boots, he said, "Want a shine, sir?" The stout man came forward deliberately and put his foot on the rest. "Yes," he said. Then, when Dick fell to work, the stout man looked from Dick to the sign, and from the sign to Dick. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "From a friend of mine," said Dick. "A little feller. He guv me the whole outfit. He was the best little feller ye ever saw. He's in England now. Gone to be one of them lords." "Lord," asked Mr. Hobbs with ponderous slowness. "Lord Fauntleroy? Going to be Earl of Dorincourt?" Dick almost dropped his brush. "Why, boss!" he exclaimed. "Do you know him yourself?" "I've known him," answered Mr. Hobbs, wiping his warm forehead, "ever since he was born. We was lifetime acquaintances. That's what we was." It really made him feel quite agitated to speak of it. He pulled the splendid gold watch out of his pocket and opened it, and showed the inside of the case to Dick. "When this you see, remember me," he read. "That was his parting keepsake to me. 'I don't want you to forget me.' Those was his words. I'd 'a' remembered him," he went on, shaking his head, "if he hadn't given me a thing, and I hadn't seen hide nor hair on him again. He was a companion as any man would remember." "He was the nicest little feller I ever see," said Dick. "And as to sand, I never seen so much sand to a little feller. I thought a heap o' him, I did. And we was friends, too. We was sort of chums from the fust, that little young 'un and me. I grabbed his ball from under a stage for him, and he never forgot it. And he'd come down here, he would, with his mother or his nuss, and he'd holler, 'Hello, Dick!' at me, as friendly as if he was 6 feet high, when he warn't knee-high to a grasshopper, and was dressed in gal's clothes. He was a gay little chap, and when you was down on your luck, it did you good to talk to him." "That's so," said Mr. Hobbs. "It was a pity to make an earl out of him. He would 'a' shone in the grocery business, or dry goods either. He would 'a' shone." And he shook his head with deeper regret than ever. It proved that they had so much to say to each other that it was not possible to say it all at one time, and so it was agreed that the next night Dick should make a visit to the store and keep Mr. Hobbs company. The plan pleased Dick well enough. He had been a street waif nearly all his life, but he had never been a bad boy, and he had always had a private yearning for a more respectable kind of existence. Since he had been in business for himself, he had made enough money to enable him to sleep under a roof instead of out in the streets, and he had begun to hope he might reach even a higher plane in time. So to be invited to call on a stout, respectable man who owned a corner store, and even had a horse and wagon, seemed to him quite an event. "Do you know anything about earls and castles?" Mr. Hobbs inquired. "I'd like to know more of the particulars." "There's a story about some of 'em in the Penny Story Gazette," said Dick. "It's called 'The Crime of a Coronet, or The Revenge of the Countess May.' It's a boss thing, too. Some of us boys are taking it to read." "Bring it up when you come," said Mr. Hobbs, "and I'll pay for it. Bring all you can find that have any earls in 'em. If there aren't earls, markises'll do, or dukes, though he never made mention of any dukes or markises. We did go over coronets a little, but I never happened to see any. I guess they don't keep 'em round here." "Tiffany'd have 'em if anybody did," said Dick, "but I don't know as I'd know one if I saw it." Mr. Hobbs did not explain that he would not have known one if he saw it. He merely shook his head ponderously. "I suppose there's very little call for 'em," he said, and that ended the matter. This was the beginning of quite a substantial friendship. When Dick went up to the store, Mr. Hobbs received him with great hospitality. He gave him a chair tilted against the door near a barrel of apples, and, after his young visitor was seated, he made a jerk at them with the hand in which he held his pipe, saying, "Help yourself." Then he looked at the story papers, and after that they read and discussed the British aristocracy, and Mr. Hobbs smoked his pipe very hard and shook his head a great deal. He shook it most when he pointed out the high stool with the marks on its legs. "There's his very kicks," he said impressively. "His very